Hello, BookTube. It's Tuesday, and that means it's time for Tag Tuesday. This is a BookTube tradition, and I like to uphold BookTube traditions. They go right out of my head, but I really want to do a regular tag type thing. And I was actually tagged in an original tag, so I thought we'd do that today. It's the Alphabet Soup book tag, the ongoing alphabet tag project of Shawn the Book Maniac, and this is F is for Fictionalize. And he tagged me in it, so I thought I would do that today. And the first prompt gets us into trouble right away. So, and that trouble is right where you want to be in these videos, I guess. So prompt number 1 is F is for Fictionalize. Any or all of these. A, your take on autofiction. B, the writer you'd like to write the novel based on your life. And C, a work of autobiographical fiction that you'd recommend. And I want to point out here, I'm sure it wasn't Shawn's intent, but I want to point out here that there is a switch going on here. There are two things being talked about here as if they were the same thing. And I would argue that they're not. Autofiction is different from autobiographical fiction. Autobiographical fiction draws heavily on the author's own life, on the events and the people in the author's own life, many of which are transferred onto the page with little or no changes. And many of which are transferred onto the page with big changes, with big thematic or dramatic changes. Autofiction is autobiography, where nothing has been changed, where every single detail that's in the resultant work can be attested to, usually on the very young author's Facebook page, or in police records, or in the memories and Facebook pages of the other people in the story. In most cases, those other people have sued the author for breach of privacy or for a copyright claim or whatever. Autofiction it's just straight up photographic autobiography that the author and his publisher are labeling fiction. That is the only thing that is fiction about it, is the word novel on the cover of the book. Every other detail is exactly the same, from the protagonist's name to everything else that can be verified. So autofiction and autobiographical fiction are very different things. They seem similar, but they are very different. And my take on autofiction is one of pure loathing contempt. I don't care what you or your publicist decide to call something. If I have been following your Facebook feed for 10 years and then I see a work of written prose that is that Facebook feed, with all the names unchanged, with all the places unchanged, with all the dates unchanged, sometimes with excerpts, copy and pasted excerpts of the Facebook feed, then that is not fiction. And you calling it fiction doesn't make it fiction. Since when is that true? It's like me Sainted Ma used to say, if he jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you jump too? I don't care if the author or his publicist or his publisher calls that fiction. If every single detail of it is verifiable, then it's not fiction. So and as such, for you to call it fiction has only, in my opinion, one possible reason, and that is to critic-proof the result. So you call it fiction, but you ostentatiously make it exactly the same as what really happened to you, so that if a critic says this is unlikely, this is unbelievable, this is an irrational development of the plot, you think that you have the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card, which is to say, well, it really happened, so there goes your idea that it's not probable. That's not actually a defense of anything. It's not actually a defense of anything, let alone a defense of fiction. It is not a defense of fiction. It's when you do that, you are trying to critic-proof your work by saying that this work of fiction is not gainsayable because everything in it really happened, when all that does is underscore your laziness. And Shawn, in his own version of this tag, actually had the gall, the unmitigated temerity, to name two of the worst practitioners of autofiction and two of the least talented people, prose artists, of the 21st century, Karl Ove Knausgaard and Edouard Louis. Both of them do exactly what I just described. They simply transcribe their journal entries and then dump the whole wet wash of it onto the literary world as fiction. And when one of the yardsticks by which we measure whether or not an actual novelist has any talent is their power of invention, and you're just abrogating that completely. If you're Jonathan Safran Foer, you write a whole book in which the main character's name is Jonathan Safran Foer. He's married to a woman who has the same first, last, and and a maiden name as your own wife. They have the same number of kids. The kids have the same names. The kids go to the same schools. But you're going to dare to get up at the 52nd Street Y and say, this is a novel? No, it's not a novel. Just because you say it is? No, you could say it's a cookbook. It's not. So my opinion of autofiction is withering contempt. I viscerally hate it. Not necessarily because of the actual product that results. Shawn named 2 characters who couldn't write their way out of a wet paper bag, whether it's fiction or nonfiction that they're writing. And I firmly believe that neither Carl Ove Knausgaard nor Edward Louis could write anything approaching what we would consider to be imaginative fiction. It's not just that they're being opportunistic grifters, transferring the ho-hum events of their lives. Everybody's had hard times into what they're then going to call a novel. It's that if you sat them down in a room full of 18-year-old writing workshop students and you told everybody to entirely invent a story out of whole cloth and write a scene from that story, their pages would still be blank at the end of the class, and everybody else would be fine. It's not just that they're trying to critic-proof their work. It's that they're trying to hide the fact that they have absolutely no talent in the genre they're claiming to have chosen for their own. However, the end result can be good. The thing that annoys me, as you're going to see, the thing that annoys me about autofiction is the presumption. It's the arrogant presumption of the author and the publisher telling me that what I'm seeing is not what it really is. Well, that drives me nuts, absolutely nuts. The second part of the question here is, who would you get to write a novel based on your life? And I had no idea. It was a toss-up between Frank O'Connor and Douglas Adams. I don't know. But then the third one is a work of autobiographical fiction that you recommend. And you'll notice the change there. Because there's plenty of autobiographical fiction that I can name where students of the novels or short stories have successfully pointed out parallels between the fiction and the events of the author's life. I can point out plenty of those. I mean, A Passage to India is a perfectly good example. Almost anything that Forster wrote. But I want to give you examples of both, because it's not the end result of autofiction that I mind. I want the label removed. That's all. I want it to be called autobiography. It's called fiction because fiction sells better. It's just a way to nakedly game the system. Drives me nuts. But there's an example of autofiction that came to mind. H by Laurent Binet, his debut novel, I believe, it's about someone studying the assassination of the Nazi Heydrich. And the someone is Laurent Binet, and all the people in the story are people that he knows, and all the events of him going to museums and looking at the car where the shooting took place and whatnot, all of that really happened, and there are photographs, and there's a Facebook feed. So it is autofiction, but it's still really, really good. I just wish that the title were taken off it, that's all. The name of it were taken off it. But autobiographical fiction, I want to recommend so strongly Frank Conroy, who is no longer with us, sadly, and who did a perfect example on either side of the very thin line between fiction and nonfiction. For nonfiction, he did Stop Time, a memoir, which is just fictionalized enough so that I think it could count as autobiographical fiction, but it was marketed as a memoir. And then Body and Soul, a novel of his that is just autobiographical enough so that it could qualify as a memoir. But it also was fictionalized enough. Those two are perfect, those two books, are perfect meditations on that dividing line between fiction and nonfiction, which is the thing that autofiction is supposed to be playing with, except that in the hands of the two ham-handed charlatans that are Carl Ove Knausgaard and Edward Louis, nothing like that kind of play or ambiguity or multifaceted nature of it, nothing like that is exploited at all when those two do it. But when other people do, and I think that is the thing that autofiction is meant to do at heart, is to explore the borderline, the precise neutral zone between fiction and nonfiction. Be nice if people did a better job of that instead of just slapping the word novel on my journal entries. But even so, Frank Conroy's books do that beautifully. So I wanted to recommend both of those. And that was the first prompt. It was rather contentious. I don't think any of the others are. Number 2 is F is for Farm, a great book set on a farm or about farming, and or one you want to read. Naturally, the first one that came to mind here was Betty McDonald, 1945, The Egg and I, which was adapted for stage and screen and reprinted a million times, where she goes to Washington State. She travels to Washington State to run a farm, and it's a poultry farm, and it's a just utterly charming and wonderful book. I can't recommend The Egg and I strongly enough. But I also wanted to recommend Carol Bodensteiner's book, Growing Up Country, memoir about her childhood in rural Iowa. The book's description actually uses that when there's precious little in Iowa that isn't rural. It was charming, simple, but charming. And since this tag, like so much of what else Shawn does is just enamored of fiction, I swear. I also wanted to put in a recommendation here. This is a book from a couple of years ago. It's a children's picture book. It's called Farmer Duck. It's by Martin Waddell and Helen Oxenbury, and it's about a duck who decides that the human farmer on the property is just worthless and decides to start doing all the work himself. He starts to feed the animals and hoe the ground and whatnot. It's adorable, absolutely adorable, especially the ending. The ending it'll make you smile. It'll warm your heart. Then prompt number 3 is F is for Frank, Franz, Franny, or a writer that you recommend or want to read whose first or last name starts with an F. Bonus points for both first and last name. Well, want to recommend would be Ford Madox Ford. his great tetralogy, Parade's End. I find Parade's End in one trade paperback edition, and just prepare yourself to be blown away. Why this thing has not become more ensconced as a literary piece of the canon, I do not know. I mean, it is canonical, but most people don't know it. Most people, even well-read people, aren't as intimately familiar with it as they should be, or as they might be with, for instance, Brideshead Revisited. I don't understand that at all. Maybe because it's such an undertaking, and because it's fairly thick cream, so that it doesn't. Brideshead Revisited, for instance, or any of Waugh's war-oriented novels, have the benefit of Waugh's angelic command of prose, so that you just feel like you're floating on a stream to read him. And Ford Madox Ford could do that. Absolutely, he could write English like that, but he very much chooses not to in Parade's End. So even in the first half of the first novel in the set, you're right away aware of the fact that you're going to have to do some uphill walking. And maybe that's what puts people off. That's a very bad reason, though. It is such a great thing. It is such a great work. So that's going to be me, and I get double points because it's Ford Madox Ford. Then prompt number 4 is F is for the love of God. An experience of extreme exasperation while reading about a book in its entirety or a smaller section thereof. And the smaller section exasperation that my go-to example here is Thomas Harris's novel Hannibal, which is brilliant and beautifully written for its entire length, where it's about the serial killer Hannibal Lecter, who is out and free in the world. He escaped in Silence of the Lambs, and he is free in the world. He has no intention of raising his profile. He has no intention of being in a cage again. He is still killing people. He can't stop killing people, but discreetly, in ways that don't draw public attention to him. And, of course, he's still the FBI's #1 most wanted. And Clarice Starling, the FBI agent who was just a trainee when we see her in Silence of the Lambs, is still considered the world's foremost expert on Hannibal Lecter. And when a private lunatic, tries to scare Hannibal Lecter into the open to capture him on his own and torture him to death, word gets to Clarice Starling and the FBI, and she is suddenly back on the Hannibal Lecter beat. And all that is done just so beautifully. God, there's barely a sentence in that book that isn't a crystal cut gem until the ending. until the, what was it again? For the love of God ending. The very ending of the book, I won't spoil anything, but the very ending of the book is an unbelievable travesty of the whole book before that. Just an unbelievable travesty. I still can't believe that Thomas Harris made that decision. And there it is on the page. I recently reread Hannibal. I reread it in 2019 and was once again just impressed the daylights out of me up until then. And I went into it thinking, all right, when I get to that thing at the end of the book, I'm going to try my hardest to reconcile it. I'm going to try and figure out what Harris was thinking so that maybe I can like the whole of this book. But no, it doesn't work at all. So that is my smaller section thereof. But I also have a larger thing of exasperation, and that is something we've seen on my channel many times, and that is Trump books. The spate of Trump books that have come out about his White House, about his personality, about all the horrible things that he does, by authors who would claim that they are trying in a very pious way to shed a spotlight on this worst president in American history. I read and reviewed two in rapid succession: Jonathan Karl's book Front Row at the Trump Show, and A Very Stable Genius by Philip Drucker and Carol Lenning. And they're a perfect example. Both of them are a perfect example. But you could say Fire and Fury. You could say Fear by Bob Woodward, and a whole bunch of others. Basically every Trump book that's come out. Even The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. All of them partake of the kind of exasperation that I'm talking about, because these people have been in the rooms with him. They have spent time with him. They know what he is. If you listen to him talk off camera for no more than 10 minutes, you realize that he's thoroughly evil and thoroughly incompetent. Non compos mentis. That you listen to him talk for 10 minutes, it's literally like listening. I know that the comparison has been drawn many times. It's literally like listening to your vicious and dotty old great uncle or whatever, who you only see at Thanksgiving, and who doesn't make much sense, but you can sense the bile from across the room. That is the impression that Donald Trump makes on everyone when they spend any kind of time with him, when the cameras are off, or even nowadays, since he can't go to his Klan rallies anymore, so he has to do this weird psychodrama of his daily press briefings about a deadly pandemic, where all he does is squabble with the press and tell lies, or reveal complete incomprehension of the world around him. And yet, the reason why he's been taken to task many times for not putting anyone directly in charge of the country's response to this, and he's never come out and said it, but the reason why he's never done that is because he thinks he's that person, even though he doesn't understand the difference between bacteria and viruses and many other things, and takes everything personally and thinks, well, I have all of these tests stockpiled, I have all of this equipment stockpiled, I have all these ventilators stockpiled, so I've got a lot of power in this situation, I'm winning here. A total fundamental misunderstanding and betrayal of what it means to be in American public life. And every person who writes a Trump book knows that about him. They know all that about him, especially someone like Jonathan Karl, who's been following him forever. And you'll never see a hint of it in these books. Never. Never. And we're way past that. We're way past you playing footsie like that with your audience. This is way too important for you to be doing that sort of crap. For Jonathan Karl to be saying, well, perhaps the president misspoke, when Jonathan Karl knows perfectly well that the president intentionally lied. And he knows that because the president, when the cameras were off, said he was intentionally lying, and has always said that. Now is the time for you to scorched earth reveal all of that. It is not time for you to harvest sales among Trump supporters. See what you can see. For the love of God comes right out in this prompt. That in a general term, it really irritates me that we don't have any Trump books of the good kind. We don't have any real Trump books. Instead, we have all of these things that are trying to ride the wave into their bank accounts when it's the whole nature of the country that's at stake. Anyway. Prompt number 5 is F is for Find, a book with lots of F's in the title. Bonus points for more than 2. By sheer coincidence, I do get bonus points here because the book I have in mind is by Marty Becker and a bunch of other people, and it's called From Fearful to Fear-Free. And it's a little book about how to de-phobia your dog. What happens if you get a dog who is fearful, a dog who is nervous? And the book came out just a couple of years ago, and I one of you emailed me because you'd just gotten a dog who was fearful, who was not timid, that's one thing, but I mean fearful, nervous, miserable because of it. And you were wondering what you should do and whether or not I could recommend any books. Well, the person who actually wrote to me said, I realized that all I should do is ask you, but if I wanted a book, could you recommend one? And I couldn't. I had never heard of a book that did any good. Barbara Woodhouse, for instance, No Bad Dogs, is not very good on weaker dogs like that, dogs with weaknesses like that. So I went looking to see if maybe there was a book written by somebody that I know or recommended by somebody that I know, and I found this one. I didn't actually read it, so I don't know if it's any good. My own advice on the subject is kind of draconian, and not a lot of dog owners want to hear that. If you have a fearful, timid dog, someone who needs reassurance and hand-holding, but who, when you give it, when you give the dog that reassurance, calms down and becomes happy again and is, oh, well, okay, that really startled me. I'm a very high-strung person, but this is wonderful and I'm so happy that you're doing it. If you have that, then fine. Then your course of action is clear. That's what you must do for the whole of the dog's life. I've been in that position. You just have to comfort them. That's all. They just require more work. That's all. Same thing with humans or any other kind of animal. If they're just built that way and they need a little bit of cosseting to get back to happy, then you just must do that, plain and simple. But if they never get back to happy, if they're just miserable all the time, and you can't ever make them happy, my advice then would be very different, and most dog owners don't want to hear it. So I was looking for a book to sort of help me with that. But I never used this book. I never recommended it to the person. But I remembered when I looked at this tag that it has many F's in the title, so we'll go with that. Then prompt number 6 is F is for father, a work of fiction in which fatherhood is the central concern. Once again, I know this is F is for fictionalize, but fiction. I swear. I wanted to say to Shawn, if you love fiction so much, why don't you marry it? But of course he has a hottie husband already, doesn't he? So the one that came to mind, a book about fathers, is of course naturally on my mind, is Mr. Scarborough's Family by Anthony Trollope, which we're reading in our year of consorting with Lonely Trollops. We're reading it in April. The story of an utterly remarkable and principle-free Mr. Scarborough who has 2 sons and feels for his sons everything that you'd wish a father to feel except affection. He feels a lot of other things. Duty, obligations, scorn, resentment. But the one central element that you'd expect in a story about fathers and sons is just matter-of-factly not present. Makes it all the more fascinating for me to be rereading it. Then 7 is for, F is for Finland. Nobody knows how Shawn's mind works. A book set in or by a Finnish author that you recommend or would like to try. Find out about one if need be. It'll be fun. A little bit of Shawn the teacher coming through there. I bet that his students love having him as a teacher. And I thought of one that we've seen on this channel already. We saw it years ago on this channel. It's Compartment Number 6 by Rosa Lixom, which I have only read in an English language translation. It's a tiny little thing about a woman taking a long cross-country train from Moscow all the way out into the hinterlands, who ends up sharing her compartment with a big, larger-than-life, rude, somewhat vaguely dangerous man who has all sorts of tall tales to tell. And I thought it was amazing. I just loved it. Can't remember if I reviewed it or not. But if I did, I will leave a link to my review down below. I heartily recommend it. Then prompt number 8 is F is for fangirl, a new or new to you writer you're really excited about. I don't tend to do this. I tend to go book by book instead of getting on any kind of author bandwagon because, as Shawn points out many times on his own channel, authors can let you down. Books, it's try as you might, but authors, as just a general career, can let you down. Even Trollope can let you down. But I did, in the spirit of the tag, I did find an author just recently. I read one of his books, and I read it in a shot. I read it in like an hour, and it wasn't any great literature, but it was extremely heartfelt and extremely sweet and memorable. And I really liked it. So I did what I seldom do, which is to go on, these are all ebooks. I went and to see what else the author had done. Turns out he's written a slew of other books. So I downloaded another one and read that one and really liked it. So he's 2 for 2, and I'm thinking if I download another one, I will probably like that as well. The author is Daniel Elijah Sandifer, and he writes contemporary gay fiction, usually about very young protagonists, usually young boys. And I read Beautiful Abomination. I really liked it and thought, okay, well, let's give him another try. Let's try another one. So I downloaded The Outdoorsman's Son, which is a little bit more lighthearted than Beautiful Abomination. And I really liked it too. Again, this is not heavily long cooked prose. This is meant to be just read on a very demonic level, but I really liked it. I really enjoyed them both. So I will probably download another of his now that I'm firmly in the ebook world. And let's see. Prompt number 9 is F is for fling, where you loved one book by a writer but nothing else. And a number of authors came to mind, and one of the first ones that did is Gary Jennings, historical novelist Gary Jennings, who wrote a book called Journeyer about Marco Polo. Big, fat historical novel about Marco Polo's. We saw Marco Polo in our March of the Penguins, but that was his own book. Journeyer is a big, lavish, pull out all the stops historical novel about Marco Polo's time in the East. And it is fantastic, just fantastic. It's an amazing reading experience, even before Marco Polo leaves for the East. It's amazing everywhere, and so moving, and such a work that is constructed on such a large scale. Just every little thing you could ask for: heartfelt love, lost love, military adventure, personalities, clashing cultures, you name it, and it's in there. It's just fantastic. And I have tried to like Gary Jennings' other books, especially Aztec, his other commercial hit, and it just hasn't happened. It just hasn't happened at all. I wanted very much to like Raptor, a big, huge book of his historical novel about a hermaphrodite, and I couldn't. I just couldn't. I liked sections of it, but not the whole thing. And all the sequels to Aztec the same way. Journeyer is the only book of his that I have really loved. I have liked some of the others. I liked parts of Raptor. I liked parts of Aztec, but Journeyer I love from start to finish, and I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It is just incredible. And then let's see here. Prompt number 10 is F is for Friends. A novel that satisfyingly explores friendship. And Shawn mentioned The Group by Mary McCarthy, which always makes me smile because I think it's great. I think it's a great book. I think it's an American classic. It was wonderful to me to hear that he liked it. It's always a little bit of a body blow to me when he reads something that I like and doesn't like it. And since he mentioned The Group, and since he praised it on his channel, I thought I would not only second that praise, but also throw in a nonfiction recommendation, which is Between Friends, a volume of letters between Mary McCarthy and her friend Hannah Arendt that is amazing. It's an amazing collection of letters. If you don't read letter collections, you don't read nonfiction, you're still going to love it. But I wanted to make a recommendation as well, and that is The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer, contemporary novel about a group of friends that I thought was really, really good. Really, really good. And then prompt number 11 is the last one, and that is F is for Far and Wide. Tag feverishly. And although Shawn tagged me, I have heard from a lot of people, a lot of booktubers, that the festive, sort of friendly atmosphere of a tag just doesn't, they're just not feeling it these days. I don't know if that's still true. But it's made me hesitant to tag people when I'm doing tags. Now, maybe I shouldn't feel that way. Maybe I should just go right ahead and do it. But I'm worried that I'll tag somebody who doesn't feel like tagging it. And that might just be a question of me getting over myself, because if they get tagged by me and they don't feel like doing it, they don't have to do it. But nevertheless, I'm going to take a page from Shawn's old playbook and say, enough with the individual tagging for this one. If you want to do this and you're watching this video, I urge you to do it. I am subscribed to all of you. I want to see this if you want to do it. So I'm just going to leave it general at that. If you're in the mood for doing a tag, then consider yourself tagged by me. And Shawn would say the same thing. He does in his own video, that if you want to do this, consider yourself tagged by him as well. I understand the mind frame behind his initial decision months and months and months ago to sort of get away from tagging specific people. I understand that mind frame, and I sort of subscribe to it. So, but especially so in this case. So if you see this tag and you like these prompts and want to do it, then by all means do, because I want to hear it. I want to hear your answers. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. Thank you very much, Shawn, for tagging me, and I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.